Brothers and sisters, welcome to St. Matthew's Gospel. What I'd like to do today is just give you a bit of an introduction into the Gospel and then spend a little bit of time also on the infancy narratives, which is Matthew's chapters 1 and 2. So first off, the introduction. And I'd like to do 4 things here. The first is to spend a little moment or two on why is Matthew's Gospel always placed first in the list of Gospels. Then the second thing I'd like to do is, who on earth is Matthew? The third thing, what is Matthew's attitude towards Judaism? And lastly, how does he structure his book? So first off, why is Matthew's Gospel placed first in the list of Gospels? Good question. For nearly 1800 years, until about 200 years ago, Matthew was thought of as being written by one of the 12 apostles. That was written first in Hebrew or Aramaic, and it's written as the most complete account of Jesus' work. Everybody thought that. And so that's the reason it was placed first. You see, Mark and Luke were not apostles. And John, there was some doubt whether it was St. John, sometimes it was called the beloved disciple, and so on. So not quite as clear as Matthew. A wonderful bishop from about the year 125 AD, Papias of Hierapolis, wrote this: Matthew compiled the sayings of Jesus in the Aramaic language, and everyone translated them as best as they could. Matthew also is the one and the only one of the evangelists that uses the word church. The church, us, ecclesia. Ecclesial, we say sometimes, ecclesiastical. Ecclesia means the gathering, the church, the congregation. And of course, the fathers of the church and many church leaders look to Matthew as offering advice for how we live in the church. It's a very practical book. It's almost a handbook of Christian teaching. So it quickly caught on as the most important, the first of the Gospels. Also, if you just think about it, we know and we speak, we pray the Our Father in St. Matthew's version, not St. Luke's. We talk about the 8 Beatitudes, which we know, rather than the 4 Beatitudes of St. Luke. The Sermon on the Mount, everybody thinks of as quintessentially the message of Jesus. And nobody can forget the Last Judgment scene. Think of the Sistine Chapel and other Last Judgments painted throughout the course of history. So it really is taken in our imagination, very, very much so, this first of the Gospels. Now, who is Matthew? Second thing. Well, there's no evidence, as there is for some other Gospels, that the first Gospel ever bore any other title than according to Matthew. Nor has there been any doubt that the Matthew referred to is Levi, the tax collector. And we remember the call of Levi the tax collector from Jesus in Matthew chapter 9. And he's listed always amongst the 12, Matthew. So it's always clear to us, this is the work of an apostle. And St. Jerome, who lived in the 4th century, a long while after Papias, said this, and there's something really lovely about what St. Jerome says. The great biblical scholar, Jerome, Matthew, who is also called Levi, a former tax collector, then an apostle, first composed a gospel of Christ in Judea, for the sake of those who had come to the faith from the circumcision, that is, Jewish people. And he wrote it in Hebrew letters and words. It's not known with certainty who subsequently translated it into Greek. The Hebrew text itself is still preserved to this day in the library of Caesarea. Well, actually, sadly, we don't have it anymore. So the copy that we have there is the Greek version. But it's very, very good. It looks to us as though it's the original version. But we have to take what St. Jerome says. Perhaps there were two versions. Now, continuing, who is this Matthew? A fellow called Stendhal, who was a great writer. I remember when I first studied St. Matthew, over 30 years ago, he was big. And he shows us, very clearly through his writings, that the community that St. Matthew came from resembled very much the community of Qumran and the community of St. John, or the beloved disciple, the fourth gospel. In this, that each of those three communities held together study, wonderful study of the scriptures, and worship. They were both intimately connected in each of those three communities. Qumran, just a reminder, Qumran, we only have come to understand who or what Qumran is from discovering the Dead Sea Scrolls just after the Second World War. And they're a fantastic community of Jewish monks and nuns who led a very spiritual life, away from the city, away from the temple, out in the desert. And their motto almost was to prepare the way of the Lord. And we think that it's more than likely that St. John the Baptist was brought up in the Qumran community. So, when we think of who Matthew really is then, it's most likely that the gospel we have comes from a very scholarly, meditative Christian synagogue late in the 1st century, in the 80s. And that Matthew himself is a former scribe. He knew scriptures, he loves the scriptures. Just think of what he said in chapter 13, verse 52. Every scribe who has become a disciple of the kingdom is like a householder who's able to bring out of his treasure what's new and what's old. So what a wonderful gift a scribe has. Is he describing who he's trying to be? It would seem to be. And about the law, Jesus says, this is what he quotes, I didn't come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. So that's what a scribe wants to do, wants to study the law and see how it's applied today. And even more than that, of course, Jesus fulfills the law in an incredible way. So we've got him now as a scribe in a Christian synagogue. And then we think the place where he was writing from was Antioch. Antioch, the first place that the disciples were called Christian. And Antioch, of course, is the third biggest city in the Roman Empire, with a very big Jewish population, because it's the nearest huge city. Alexandria also had a very big Jewish population. And it was very open, Antioch, to the Gentiles, to non-Jewish people to come into the community. Because we can sense from the gospel that many Gentile people were coming into Matthew's church, Matthew's Christian synagogue. The centurion, remember that lovely episode with the centurion, and Jesus says to him,